The McDonald's story is usually told like this. Two brothers start a small burger stand. Fast food is born, and everyone involved gets rich. That isn't what happened. The brothers who created McDonald's lost control of the company, watched someone else turn it into a global empire, and later weren't even allowed to use their own name. What's strange is that none of this felt like a mistake while it was happening. Every decision made sense at the time. That's how they lost everything. Long before McDonald's was a brand, it was a drive-in restaurant in San Bernardino, California, run by two brothers, Richard McDonald and Maurice McDonald. They were not flashy men. They weren't chasing trends or recognition. They were practical, detail-oriented, and increasingly frustrated. The restaurant was busy, which should have been a good thing. Cars filled the lot. Teenagers gathered after school. Families stopped in on weekends. The cash register stayed active, but the operation itself felt chaotic. Orders piled up faster than they could be handled. Car hops made mistakes. Food quality changed depending on who was working the grill. Labor costs climbed because the only way to keep up was to add more people. Instead of feeling successful, the brothers felt overwhelmed. They didn't blame customers. They didn't blame staff. They blamed the system. So they began paying attention to details most restaurant owners ignored. They watched what people ordered, not what sold occasionally, but what sold constantly. They tracked movement in the kitchen. They noticed how often employees crossed paths, waited for ingredients, or corrected mistakes. The pattern became obvious. Most of the menu barely mattered. Customers came for burgers, fries, and soda. Everything else slowed the operation down. That observation led to a decision that shocked everyone around them. They closed the restaurant. Not for renovations, not for a short break. They shut it down so they could rebuild the entire operation from the ground up. When the restaurant reopened, it barely resembled what it had been before. The menu was stripped down to a few core items. There were no car hops. Customers ordered at a window. Food came wrapped in paper, not served on plates. Behind the counter, the kitchen had been transformed. Every station had a specific purpose. Ingredients were pre-measured. Movements were choreographed. The brothers even tested layouts by marking positions on the ground, watching how workers moved and adjusting until nothing overlapped unnecessarily. This wasn't about creativity. It was about eliminating waste. A burger didn't take minutes. It took seconds. At first, customers were confused. The experience felt unfamiliar. But once people realized how fast the food arrived, the confusion turned into curiosity. And curiosity turned into lines. The restaurant became busier than it had ever been. Without trying to, the McDonald brothers had created something new. Not just a restaurant, but a system that produced consistent results regardless of who was working. And that distinction matters more than it seems. As word spread, other restaurant owners began paying attention. Some tried copying the setup on their own. Others asked the brothers directly how they were doing it. Eventually, the brothers agreed to franchise the system, but they approached it carefully, almost reluctantly. Franchise licenses were inexpensive. Oversight was strict. Locations were approved slowly. Growth moved at a pace they felt comfortable managing personally. They were not interested in rapid expansion. They cared about control. To the brothers, McDonald's was a well-run restaurant with a clever process. It wasn't a brand vision or a growth engine. It wasn't something they imagined spreading endlessly across the country. They were engineers solving a problem, not entrepreneurs chasing scale. That mindset kept the system clean. It also kept it vulnerable. When Ray Kroc walked into the McDonald Brothers restaurant for the first time, he wasn't thinking about food trends or customer loyalty. He was thinking about consistency. Kroc had spent years struggling as a salesman. He understood margins, volume, and systems, and what he saw in that kitchen wasn't just efficiency, it was predictability. The operation didn't rely on exceptional talent, it relied on process. That meant it could be taught, it could be repeated, it could be expanded. Where the brothers saw a restaurant they wanted to protect, Kroc saw a machine that could be duplicated thousands of times. He pitched himself as the person who could take McDonald's nationwide. The brothers were cautious. They had already seen franchise attempts fail. They didn't like the idea of losing control. Eventually, they agreed to let Kroc handle national franchising while they retained authority over standards. It felt like a compromise. It was not. The agreement gave the brothers a percentage of gross sales. That detail mattered to them. Gross revenue felt transparent. They wouldn't have to trust profit reports or accounting tricks. Kroc would build. They would collect. What they didn't understand was how power naturally follows execution. Kroc selected franchisees. He trained them. He solved their problems. He became the person they relied on. The brothers stayed in California, refining standards that fewer people felt obligated to enforce. Nothing was taken from them directly. Authority didn't disappear. It slowly relocated, and relocation is much harder to notice than loss. Early expansion was difficult. Franchise fees alone didn't create stable cash flow. Growth was expensive. Kroc struggled financially. That's when he noticed something the brothers had never prioritized. Restaurants can fail. Land rarely does. Kroc formed a separate real estate company that bought or leased the land under McDonald's restaurants, then rented it to franchisees. This single decision changed the entire structure of the business. McDonald's was no longer just selling food, it was collecting rent. If a franchisee ignored standards, the issue wasn't burgers or branding. It was a lease, and leases are enforceable in ways suggestions are not. The brothers had no stake in this real estate company. While they argued about kitchen changes and ingredient shortcuts, Kroc was building leverage that didn't require their approval. From that point forward, McDonald's expansion accelerated dramatically. The system no longer depended on the people who invented it. As the company grew, conflict became constant. The brothers resisted powdered milkshake mix. Kroc approved it to cut costs and simplify logistics. The brothers wanted tighter controls. Kroc prioritized speed and uniformity. Each disagreement ended the same way. Kroc moved forward, the brothers objected. But objection without leverage doesn't slow momentum. Over time, the brothers became exhausted. They were aging. They were tired of fighting decisions they could no longer control. Kroc wanted full authority, so he made an offer. The buyout came in the early 1960s, and on paper it looked like a clean ending. Ray Kroc offered around $2.7 million for full control of the company. At the time, that was real money. Not empire-level wealth, but enough to feel safe. Enough to stop worrying about daily arguments, phone calls, and decisions they could no longer influence anyway. For the McDonald brothers, the offer felt less like surrender and more like relief. Years of tension had worn them down. They were tired of fighting over details that no longer seemed to matter. Selling meant stability. It meant walking away from constant conflict. There was also something else. The brothers believed there was a verbal agreement for a small ongoing royalty. Nothing formal, nothing written down, just a handshake understanding, which still carried weight to them. That money never arrived. Once the papers were signed, McDonald's belonged entirely to Kroc's vision. The brothers walked away with a lump sum, but without ownership, influence, or a future stake in what they had created. After the sale, the brothers kept their original restaurant and renamed it the Big M, continuing to serve food the way they always had. It wasn't meant to compete, it was simply familiar. Then a new McDonald's franchise opened nearby. Traffic slowly shifted. Legal pressure followed, subtle but persistent. Eventually, the brothers closed their doors. The place where the system was first tested and refined disappeared without ceremony. This is not a story about villains or bad intentions. The McDonald brothers built a system that worked because it was precise and controlled. Ray Kroc built a structure that could grow without them. Only one of those approaches determines who holds power in the end. The brothers focused on how things should run. Kroc focused on who would own the future. Most business stories don't end with dramatic collapse. They end through reasonable decisions that feel safe at the time. That's what makes this one uncomfortable, because nothing here required betrayal, just different priorities. If you like stories where power shifts quietly and the consequences only become clear years later, subscribe and let me know which company's origin story you want next.